And I've switched on the captions as well, so they're running too. So again, welcome everyone to our weekly call. Just to briefly share my screen, just as a reminder what we're going to talk about today. So in a second, as you can see, I'll hand over to Abby and Jim to talk about internet. Internet of Things DNS security and privacy guidelines based on some research. So Abby's going to share some of the research, and then Jim's going to talk about a related internet draft. And then we're to sort of talk through some of the other sort of stuff that's happened over the last week or so. I'll remind you of some impending deadlines and some forthcoming events, etc. And depending on time, we'll also or there may be time at the end for any other business as well. But we'll see how we get on. But the important thing, as I said, is for me to hand over to Jim, but first Abby, to learn a lot more, and potentially, if presentation I set in on in RIPE in Lisbon, which I was just remembering earlier on today, we may become very depressed about really poor security on IoT devices, but I don't want to steal Abby's thunder. Who knows? When it comes to DNS related things, it might be fantastic. We might be in for a pleasant surprise rather than lots of worry. But I suspect many of us might want to rush around afterwards disconnecting everything, any smart devices, because as I say, from the presentation in Lisbon, it was really bad. But with that lead in, Abby first, over to you. We're really looking forward to this, and I'm sure it's going to be an interesting presentation. So welcome to the call, and the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot, Andrew, for the opportunity. So I will share my screen. Can make it. Second. I hope you can still see my screen.
Yep, all clear.
Yep, good.
Oh, good. Just minimize it. Yes. So today I'll be. I'm Abhi. I'm part of INRIA, postdoc at INRIA, and doing joint work with UCL. So here I will be talking about our research, which was done on DNS behavior in IoT, in which we basically found out multiple issues, which will subsequently turn into operational security BCP. So going into the talk, let's first see if DNS security and privacy in IoT is actually governed through security privacy regulations, guidelines. So we did a state of the art first. So we were suspecting issues, but then we were like, are there already privacy regulations or guidelines? So we looked into, for example, ETSI, NIST, ENISA, European Commission, ISO, ITU, IETF drafts, IEEE, W3C, CIS, all of that. And we were when looking into it, into all of their documents and drafts, we found that there is very little mention of DNS. But DNS is there, but DNS specific to IoT, not at all. So you might be thinking, why do we need that? So we'll see next when I describe the issues. But the core idea is we have these devices are resource constrained, as well as they have a peculiar behavior on startup, which makes them specific to fingerprinting and other vulnerabilities that they could be targeted on. So I will mostly talk about the issues next that we found, and then we'll go slowly converge into how to fix them and what guidelines we propose. So so to actually find the issues, we have experimental test bed, a large scale test bed in UCL, where we have where we have for this particular work we have 35 diverse IoT devices ranging from miniature smart plugs to smart TVs, and these all are automated power control. So you could trigger them through your smartphone. We have so and we do both active and passive measurements. So we collect as at AP level, and then we also have we have an active threat adversary where a local resolver can be malicious and could send forged replies. We also will see how DOS affects these devices. So looking into the issues, once we had this setup, we started with the passive ones. So we started passive collection of these devices' behavior. So we did multiple startups of these IoT devices. We triggered them automatically, and through multiple runs, we tried to analyze them. So first issue that we found in these devices is lack of source port randomization, for example. So if you look into it, if you look into standard deviation of source ports on the y-axis, we will see that there are devices which, for example, this camera here or plugs, Arlo camera or a certain plug, for example, here. Some of them don't randomize them almost at all, and some of them do it quite poorly. So, um, what next? So that was about source port. What about transaction IDs? So when we look into transaction IDs again, we didn't see things were even a bit more severe here. So we saw devices which basically don't do at all transaction ID randomization, whereas multiple of them do it in very short range, while some of them do it quite poorly. So that was the second issues that we found. Uh,
Uh,
Going further,
Sorry,
we yes.
sorry, just to interrupt, but there's a question in the chat which it might be useful to answer whilst you're
Should
going,
I
which
answer
is
it right now or should
I,
take?
I, I, I think so, just for to aid clarity.
Yeah, yeah,
It's
sure.
does excellent on this chart mean the product has excellent source port randomization?
Yeah, so that was based on some classification we did, and so basically, so above let's say 10,000 or something. So we divided into bins, and the ones which were randomizing beyond these bins across the time period of observation were classified into excellent, for example. S- So yeah, I hope that clears. So then so that was about transaction IDs, and and then, so stepping back, we wanted to look into how these queries actually look like from IoT devices. So most of them, surprisingly, are quite repetitive in nature. So as you can see here with different colors, so certain queries dominate, and they generally do it without specific reasons. We will dive deep into it, but these are even in short span, uh, you have queries that these devices do over and over, even though they got replies. So they are quite repetitive in nature. We try to see why this is the phenomena. And but before doing that, we were also thinking of do the devices actually support, for example, DOH? So we tried to push them into DOH, but we saw that none of the devices support. But this also meant that when we forced them to do on DOH, there was a resolution failure. And with resolution failure, with the one on the when you compare with the left one on with the right one we have the failure. The right plot shows that the number of queries are actually amplified. So even in normal circumstances, they are quite repetitive and large in volume. But then, if there are some failures, this gets amplified around tenfold on average, which could be a concern. So yeah, so this if in conditions of failure, the number of queries could go quite high. Diving deeper, how vulnerable are these queries? So looking into, for example, packet size distributions, we see that query length is quite variable. So the mean varies as well as the standard deviation across devices and that were put into and that we were looking it out into in the test bed. And that so this significant variations across devices means that they are highly fingerprintable as they are due to their uniqueness. So they do. We also show in one of the other side researches that even though hypothetically we put them into DOH, still just using metadata like intertime, interpacket times, and packet length is enough to even fingerprint at start of the DOH. So yeah, we recommend that even with DOH we need padding. So that was so that's looking into the fingerprintability of these devices. Uh, Going back into the causes of the repetitive queries, we tried to see what precedes these queries. So we saw that most of the queries were preceded by a significant number of ICMP pings without much follow-up traffic, and they kept on querying and querying these IoT devices. Uh, what about IPv6? The usage was quite low, less than 30%. Most of the devices don't opt for that. Uh, DOH, I already said, there was no support, which led to the failure, and the failure leads to query amplification. But another interesting phenomena that we found when we looked into non-support for DOH is the presence of fallback addresses. So certain devices had hard-coded fallback addresses, which they kept on contacting, even though we set a specific result through DHCP. They override that and they keep on going through these fallback addresses. Uh, uh, Going deeper, we also looked into TTLs, for example. So TTLs seen had a wide range in the queries, but the queries were not abiding it. Uh, uh, as Sorry, I was looking in the questions. So in the chat. The queries don't abide that, and they keep on querying irrespective of the TTLs they receive in the replies. What about eDNS zero? So eDNS zero support was lacking, and also the MDNS traffic we analyzed in this IoT devices was quite large in certain devices in a short duration, which could next lead to potential privacy risks. So these were so until now I mentioned most of the work was done in the active in the passive adversary context, but now we take the active threat model. So in active threat model, we have an adversary which could get access to the local resolver and basically forge replies. So what happens if in such a threat model? So to check that we had multiple cases of an active adversary. So starting with the first one, we basically deleted all the resource records and saw the behavior. So here in the plot here, you can see the first one is the benchmark, DO53, all working benign. While the next ones here are the ones, for example, when we force to DOH, what happens to the average queries, average number of queries and retries? Then what happens when we delete all resource records? What happens when we have insert a fake record of various types? What happens if we forge TTLs? And so on. So we will look into an active adversary context. So for example, when we delete, looking at the first one, when we delete all the resource records, we observe high surge in number of queries and retry attempts as devices continue to attempt resolution without success. But these are IoT devices, which do multiple fold amplification and queries and retries, which could even cause further operational and security concerns. Looking next into the injection of fake RRs, in the same plot, we basically see that devices accept forged replies and also keep retrying queries if they fail to interpret. The forged IPs that they were assigned. What about TTLs? If we forge them, so the IoT devices understandably or do not cache responses, and then they basically disregard TTL values and initiate the queries even before the TTL expiration, which we could see it from the application here. We set the values of TTL very low to very high, and what we saw that when the values were in both the cases, there were certain devices that basically amplified their queries, while when we force them to a very high value, an absurd very high value, some of the devices do even stop querying, but some of them don't care, and then they disregard and keep their usual behavior. What about DOS? So we subject IoT devices to two kinds of amplification attacks. Firstly, we basically amplify the number of responses by a certain factor. So by a factor of let's say 10, 50, and 100 here. So what we found is like at high amplification, one of the device experienced the loss of connectivity. So this could lead to loss of connectivity. While we also looked into the second category when we basically oversize the payload by increasing the number of A records, for example, in the DNS response, and again using the same amplification ratios. Here it was more severe. So 23% of the devices basically suffered the loss of connectivity. And one interesting bit that we found here that they maintain the UDP transport and basically fragment at IP layer rather than they don't set the TC bit and transition to TCP. So that was multiple issues that we found, but then this led to a BCP draft with IATF, which Jim will talk next in details. So I will maybe hand over to Jim before, or I can take questions here.
If anyone's got any other clarification questions, otherwise we can hold them till the end. And
yeah, I see there's a question from Vicky about similarity in device behavior. Maybe Vicky talking about that when we talk about the draft might be worthwhile, because to an extent we might touch on that.
Yeah, I was just thinking that there would be a lot more places where, you know, a lot of the responses were the same on the tests instead of so much variation. But as soon as I posted that, then the next slide he had did have a lot of consistency. So
yeah, I mean, I naively imagine that there'd be a standard set of sort of operating system libraries or whatever that we used, a kind of standard distribution, but it doesn't always appear that way, I guess, from the research that UCL have done. But yeah, so where I've come into this is being involved in the internet draft process, really. This is a kind of one-slide summary that Abhi put together actually on the security and privacy issues. The bit we'll focus on for this is the part on the left. Why IoT specific guidelines? Essentially what we're talking about in the draft is the best current practice. That's what we want to aim it at in terms of the standards process. And there's a few things that are specific to IoT devices. Abhi mentioned power, for instance, power constraints. But they're just not general This is the type I'm using to present this, the sort of Windows Apple devices that we have, where there's perhaps more focus on them. They vary greatly between things that are more kind of operational technology and upmarket through to all the kinds of stuff like doorbell cameras that we stick on our networks at home, perhaps. There's clearly the resource constraints. There's in fact DNS over COPE coming along for resource constrained devices. Of course, IoT devices don't have security agents of the type that I've got on this laptop here, so they're more vulnerable from that perspective. Clearly, we don't want them profiled, or they're more susceptible to that. Certainly, Infoblox, for instance, also does DHCP related stuff, and we fingerprint them based on the way they behave from DHCP. So it's not really surprising they also behave in a similar way from a DNS perspective. They're doing fewer queries for more specific things, I guess. So we wanted to map the DNS RFCs to particular IoT vulnerabilities that were observed, and it sort of can be a guide to operators that are involved in large IoT type deployments. But we especially wanted it to be a guide for manufacturers. There's organizations that Abhi showed initially, like Etsy, for instance. What we thought was having this draft with the standards organization, i.e. the IETF, that develops the DNS protocol. It means that various organizations like Etsy or regulatory authorities, those that perhaps doing certifications around IoT devices, can reference that. That was some of the thinking there. As far as the draft goes, this is sort of pictorial the way I think of it, in that obviously we've got the device, the stub resolver, the resolver and the authoritative servers involved in the DNS activity from IoT devices. And I've not quoted the numbers here. The BCP draft that we've done references those, and they're in the individual sections of the draft. Definitely please go away and do a bedtime reading on that, and we'd welcome comments. So one of the problems that's been seen in the research is resolvers ignoring the DNS servers that they've been given, and perhaps using an open resolver because something's obviously hard coded on the device. So they should be set appropriately, whether it's through DHCP, discovery of network resolvers, or router advertisements, or whatever. The devices should use encrypted DNS. I've added to the usual suspects of DO, H, Q, and T, as in DNS over COPE, which is something going through the standards tracks at the moment. Clearly, source ports and transaction IDs should be randomized, as two of the things that are involved in the four elements that make a DNS transaction unique. They need to support EDNS, and they need to support truncation and changing to TCP. That's something evident from the search that's not there. Where it, I guess, gets to the client behavior and probably the libraries that are on it, the client should definitely respect the TTLs. I think we've got a caveat in there, though, that we put in around the vendors might want to have a minimum maximum types, in the same way as you can put that on resolver caches. If you think about devices being managed remotely and they were to cache something for an exceptionally long time, that would be unmanageable. So that was the thought there. In terms of using DNSSEC and really getting around or mitigating the risks involved in queries being manipulated in transit, so doing validation, the devices could check the AD bit. We're actually expanding the draft to be more specific there. Obviously, the resolvers are involved in this, and some of the mitigations against these security risks can be done at the resolver. We're going to have different types of resolvers involved in this. It could be anything like customer premises equipment, i.e. home routers. It might be resolvers on IPs, or it might be people that are running IoT type devices on private networks. Think, for instance, hospitals that are having a lot of IoT devices, but obviously they're very critical because they're involved in clinical care. So there might be different scenarios here. Clearly, the resolver could do validation. Might be times when we don't want the inappropriate behavior of IoT devices caused by not getting an answer. Some of those large volumes of queries. So serve stale is an option there. The operator might want to restrict resolution to no management domains. They could get those via MUD. Actually, the manufacturers could just publish a list, but I think I see a question coming. Is that right?
There's a couple of questions related to the test suite, so you might.
Okay, so perhaps we'll come back to that. Okay. Yeah, so the operator, particularly in a more constrained or closed network, might want to restrict queries to no management domains. They also might want to block to the well-known sort of open resolvers if they're trying to secure those devices. IoT devices have been quite notorious for being involved in things like, or used for things like denial of service attacks, etc. Maybe they're controlled by some C2 somewhere. So actually blocking open resolvers that might bypass the controlled and logged network resolver could be something that people want to do depending on the network type. At the authoritative server end, obviously the manufacturers need to sign the management zones in order to make DNSSEC active. That's something they should do. And they should publish the domains that are used for management of the devices, where you can see if they are compromised, used for some other purpose because they're querying other domains, or you might restrict domains that can be resolved on the network. Obviously, manufacturers should think about appropriate TTLs, which is really the things that the IoT client should honour. Those are probably the sort of main elements that are in the draft. We'd appreciate feedback. We are working on a second version of the draft that was presented by Abhi and myself at ETF 123 Madrid. There was actually also a presentation in Madrid to the Internet Research Task Force as well. Andrew Losty from UCL. So we presented there. I'll try and get it on the agenda for ITF 124 as well. The sort of things we're looking to add are perhaps more wide. We've had a comment that it would be useful to that, as well as the sort of normative references. And we've had some clarification on devices getting resolvers. So I know Chris isn't on the call today, but thanks to him for setting us straight there on some stuff. We put a bit of work in recently into some clarification on DNSSEC within the draft, not to replicate what any DNSSEC RFCs say, but just to set in enough context and usage of it as options for the manufacturers. So we're looking to do a version 2 there before the ITF. Obviously, there's a bit up for discussion on how much is done on the stub resolver versus a resolver. Clearly, you could have, in theory, an IoT device do DNSSEC validation itself. And that's allowed for in the DNSSEC RFCs. I don't really know of any stub resolver that actually does that. And that's normally left to the resolver. And there's also, of course, do we need to clarify things around the different resolver types that there might be, or make that clearer? So that's being progressed through ITF. It's meant to be IoT Ops working group at the ITF, which is really appropriate to the problem space. So we sort of published it on the data tracker towards that working group, as opposed to the DNS one. We did talk with folks at DNS Op about where we should actually put that towards, and it was felt that the IoT working group was a better place for it. So some DNS folks on this call may not have seen it, I guess. Yeah, please take a look. We should probably, when we publish the second version, so make a note to DNS op that's been published. So that's it from me specifically on the draft. So, have you got any more questions for Abhi or I? I'm going to stop sharing that now.
So I think Peter first, because he had some questions, I think, on the test suite, and then potentially Vicky, I think, and then no doubt others will as well. But Peter, did you want to come in?
Yeah, I just asked it on chat, but just to repeat myself, I wanted to ask whether the test suite was available on GitHub or anything like that, because it seems like a really good set of tests, and I'd like to see how, devices on my network compare. Yeah, really, it seems great though. By the way, also very depressing, but thank you very much for the presentation and the work on the BCP is the document that you're working on. It seems amazing as well. So thumbs up.
Thanks, Peter. So yes, we are in the process of releasing the original research article. So once it's released, you will see GitHub. We will put it out. Yes.
Brilliant. Thank you.
I found it it's really interesting, all the topics that you guys talked on, and it's how do you tackle, so I take it what you guys are trying to achieve here is to try and get a nice baseline, for example, with all IoT devices wanting to be low powered, like you said, Jim, don't really want to deal with HTTPS DNS queries, custom firmware, all that type of stuff. So what you guys are trying to do is try and come up with a good baseline to provide to people who make up IoT devices to be like, look, let's stick to this DNS standard. Let's try and keep it safe. Let's not do the whole, let everything in on UDP, port 53. Is that the key concept that you guys want to achieve?
Certainly the encrypted DNS.
Yeah.
So they're only using the controlled network resolvers where that can be, for instance. But I think, Abhi, if I'm correct, certainly within the EU, for instance, there's a move towards certification of IoT devices.
Okay.
So if those certification type processes can point to the IETF draft, that would obviously improve security posture overall, basically.
Yeah.
Because it would improve the standard and stop the problems that INRIA at UCL identified.
Yeah, do you know what's interesting? Because I'm working in the space now where people are just doing like experimental things with IoT devices and stuff like that, and it's more of like, let's design it, let's make our custom firmware, let's deliver it, get people using it. Then when we have to ISO certify, then we'll look into like some of the best practices. It's quite funny, like the thought process. I don't really bake everything in from the start. It's interesting. I just know that some of the devices, this is very good. But I can just imagine it's going to be a little bit tough for people to like bring it in. But it's very interesting, like very good.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen a thumbs up from Abhi that, oh, that's on a comment. I mean, one of the things that we'd very much welcome at the ITF is people from manufacturers speaking up and saying, yeah, this seems a useful thing for us too, because it's coming from almost the consumer side of the draft, if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
If anybody on the calls involved in that interaction with the ITF or the mailing list, of course, that would be good in terms of it's being supportive.
Nice.
So I think that a lot of the original motivation for the Cyber Resilience Act was actually IoT devices. It's one of the reasons it's been so frustrating is because the regulation, which I think was coming from a what about the nanny cams kind of perspective, unfortunately just applies to all software now. And so that's been a little bit difficult. But of course, they weren't looking into this level of detail. The CRA is just, do you have a security policy? Do you follow, some very basic best practices, not specific to the DNS. So I made a comment in the chat, and maybe it's a stupid point, but I was just thinking, in terms of, selling your draft, it would be helpful to look at some of the historically really bad DNS attacks and say, hey, this wouldn't have happened if the devices had followed these BCPs. that was really my only point when I said, hey, maybe you could look at the Mirai botnet and how it took down Dyn and ask yourself,
Yeah.
would it have been, I don't know, slower to take down Dyn or somehow different? I mean, I think it wouldn't have your BCPs about DNS behavior would not have prevented the infection because that had nothing to do with DNS, but the effectiveness of the attack.
Yeah, it sort of ends up depending on the deployment of the resolver on the network. So, I mean, take a hypothetical case where I mentioned hospital earlier. Let's say they had networks for clinical devices. If they had restricted them to only query the manufacturer's domains, would have disrupted malicious activity because a query to some random DNS C2 domain would have been responded to within the next domain. So if the devices were somehow compromised, then trying to do something with them from that point
Sure, especially if it
would
was
have been stopped, right?
if it was using a resolver that employed a block list, that knew
Yeah.
about the command and control or knew about the botnet. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
or even effectively an allow list. To David's point in the chat, there's zero trust DNS where you basically, the concept is you don't trust anything and you allow it to communicate to certain domains, known trusted domains, then that's obviously more difficult operationally, but is obviously very, very much tighter from a security perspective.
Right. That's might be kind of a big ask for an IoT device, but
yeah. But so that's why some of the mitigation is on the resolver and not the device itself. Most mitigation of that kind is done at a resolver level. The same in terms of validating the queries through DNSSEC. Although the DNS device could check that it had got an AD bit, and so it could determine whether the query had been validated. That mitigates one of the points that we had, where the more active testing had the resolver compromised, so that the resolver could send notification attack of 50 or 100 queries or whatever. Of course, if the network resolver is compromised, then perhaps you could argue all bets are off. But the device can mitigate that just by checking the AD bit.
Yeah.
I mean, it's intriguing, sorry if I interrupted somebody. Sorry.
No, sorry.
Okay.
I was trying to answer, like add to the wiki's point. So I was saying that in a subsequent project, we have honeypots of emulated IoT devices deployed right now live in
Yeah.
Japan. So one thing I was just thinking that we could also try changing the setup, and introducing with and without these these proposed changes, and see how these attacks evolve on surface.
Yeah.
It could be one of the things to explore. So sorry, go on.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, Abby, I was gonna say, like an interesting. That's one of the things I was gonna ask is, so when you were doing your, like taking out the DNS records and watching it effectively spam to try and find a DNS server, and it was doing all of these type of, whatever craziness in your lab. Did you do this in, like, is it a self-hosted lab? Did you do it in AWS? Because when I implement my stuff, I'll put like Shield and, put some of the APIs behind, I don't know, like a web application, like firewalls and vice versa. Did anything in your lab attempt to fix or block the IoT device? Because I'm thinking of stuff like this, right? If it's AWS, like the setups that I have, I would hope it would capture that, and effectively it would break the IoT device, but it wouldn't stop a cost anomaly. Because I worry about this, looking at this, and when you said you change things and it attempted to find its own DNS server, that would worry me for that IoT device. Because if I've got like a transit gateway and a weird network setup in the cloud, it could create quite a bit of weird costing for me whilst this IoT device is trying to call home, for example, if it's not being blocked. So I found that bit interesting. There could be like some cost anomalies that you wouldn't understand, that I wouldn't know. It was interesting. Because where was your lab, Abby? Like when you tested
Yeah.
this?
So it's physically hosted in UCL, and I think it's an isolated setup where
Okay. Okay.
yeah, where they have the. So I didn't visit that yet. I think Jim, you
Oh,
visited.
okay.
Yeah, I've been there.
Yes.
From an OPSEC perspective, I don't know how much I should talk about the setup here,
Oh,
but
no, no. Okay.
but
Is it
it's not using a cloud
okay?
Yes.
resolver.
Okay. No worries. No worries.
It's all
Exactly.
self-contained on
Yeah.
a network.
Yeah,
Hmm.
because I hope I've got enough stuff that's set up in our environment that would just block that kind of behavior. So yeah, but it was very interesting. Very, very interesting to
Yeah, I
see
mean, if
that.
you want to talk about that kind of thing, Rian, happy to. This.
Okay. It's just interesting. Like I don't. It's yeah. I
Mm.
love listening to it. Really.
Yeah.
But yeah. Sorry. I'll stop.
Okay, I'm mindful of the time. There's a couple of things I wanted to pick up. So just see if there are any last questions. I think there's been some interesting ideas in the chat, which hopefully Abby and Jimmy can sort of just pick up. Well, obviously, you can copy the chat or share it afterwards anyway. So
Yeah, we'll do.
you have access to that. But anyone else with any last questions? If so, raise your virtual hand or unmute or put something in the chat quickly. And if not, we'll pause there and say, as expected, a really interesting, if somewhat depressing, presentation. Plenty of room for improvement in IoT, I think. Each time I hear a presentation on this, it gets even worse. There are sort of layers of how depressed you can become with just how insecure some of these devices are, and they are very insecure. Case study in bad practice in some cases, but anyway, so thank you, Abby and Jim. Really interesting. We'll
Thank you.
change tack now. Please stay on if you can. If not,
We'll do.
that's fine. But I think you've either shared me your slides or you're going to, so I'll share them with
No,
the group.
we will do. Yeah, we just had to coordinate across the pond, so we'll sort that out afterwards.
Perfect. Yeah, and I'll share those with everyone on the mailing list.
Actually,
Okay, right. Let me then move on. But thanks again. Just go back to sharing my slides, and I'll do this at pace so we definitely finish on time. So hopefully that was useful. I'll rattle through some of these just quite quickly. Some interesting stuff from the last week. Those of you that are on the weekly headlines mailing list will have had these. If you're not and want to be, ping me an email and I will add you. But so an interesting piece from GoDaddy about a trusted identity naming system for AI agents. So combining AI and a naming scheme, which seems to be underpinned by the DNS as a trust actor. But that caught my eye this week. It's worth a look. There's both a sort of a high-level summary in the link at the top of the screen there, and then the link at the end of that little piece has got rather more technical detail. So I'd commend that to you to have a look. Infoblox, as always, shamelessly, I'll say this, Jim on the call, but I would have said this regardless, doing tremendous work in threat intelligence. There's a piece on Detour Dog, which has already compromised over 30,000 sites, probably rather more than that now. The article was published last week, I think, another example, depressingly, of executing remote content through the DNS. Again, using text or TXT records. And a more detailed, I put a piece from Tech Radar to give the summary and then more detail on the Infoblox site. So this is, again, delivery of malicious content via the DNS. So I think, Peter, another one for your library of things that the DNS is being used for. Some research from Forescout Labs, which I've not come across before, looking at the sort of TLDs used for malware, and predominantly generic TLDs, with a strong preference to a small number of registrars, mainly using disposable names. Probably no major surprises, but I think always interesting to see reports that highlight specific registrars, which hopefully will be really they'll be hammered in some of the reputational measures, so that the customers go elsewhere if they're well intentioned, and make them even less attractive. Other stuff. Enrique Somoza putting a piece on the use of private DNS data lakes. For what it's worth, it just highlights why that would be a good thing in, I guess, primarily enterprise environments. Probably more usefully, quite a good piece on Italy's piracy shield, which has been live for a little while now. Some researchers have done some initial analysis to see how effective it is, what it's blocking, how much collateral damage there is. And depending on your point of view, there's a lot of collateral damage, so they need to rethink the approach. Or alternately, maybe the providers need to not have shared IP addresses or shared domains, etc., so there'd be less collateral damage. So depending on your point of view, where the fault lies there. But it's a thing, it's a legal requirement in Italy. If you're not familiar with it, was it brought in initially to prevent piracy of football specifically, but it's broadened somewhat since it was brought into force. So that caught my eye. I won't go through all of these. I just was there anything else that specifically caught up? Oh yeah, the RIPE 91 final agenda is published. So for those of you going to Bucharest or attending virtually, at least to give the structure of the days. At the time I wrote this, the agenda for the DNS working group wasn't published. However, hold that thought, I'll come back to that in a second. Also, the preliminary, not the final agenda, is available for the ITF 124 meeting in Montreal. That should be finalised this coming Friday. So then it should be reasonably stable from that point on. And then there's some good stuff, continually good stuff from AdGuard on the forthcoming Ad Filtering Dev Summit, with the profile of some of the speakers and what they're going to talk about. I noted Peter amongst the speakers and some other friends as well, and Centre belatedly done a piece on ITF 123. And then I'll pause in a second, Peter, but before I do, through today, the agenda for the DNS working group at RIPE 91 has come out, which, as you can see, introducing the new co-chair, as well as talking about local root, which Jim Reed is going to talk about, sort of TLD resilience from Ulrich. Then the reason I put XOT in practice in italics is because it was on an email from the chairs, but not on the website. So I'm not sure if they're doing that or not. And there's some stuff on DNS TTLs and an update on the RIPE NCC DNS. And they want comments of support or otherwise for their new co-chair. So if you haven't done that already and have an opinion, good or bad, you've got till a couple of weeks to mail the co-chairs with your thoughts. But Peter, did you have something you want to say about the Ad Filtering Dev Summit?
Not really. I mean, I can tell you, I was sort of just cheering for the mention. Thank you. I will be doing a talk on Tails as a block list maintainer, because I couldn't think of anything more interesting to talk about this year. Basically, I'm going to pull a few stories from the last quarter century of maintaining a block list and some hopefully little funny anecdotes, basically. But there's genuinely some really interesting talks. If you're interested in ad blocker, ad filtering, tracker, and privacy stuff online, Google it, and Opera and Microsoft and Mozilla are usually there. So yeah, it should be good. It's a couple of days. And I'll also be on a panel as well. I don't really know what's happening with that, but yeah. So,
excellent. And I have to say, AdGuard are doing a really good job. They've put out a piece. I think I mentioned this on the call last week, telling you all about Limassol and what to do, where to stay, and so on. So really raised the bar as a local host. Very impressive.
A local host. Yeah, good one, Andrew.
Right, and then finally, a few other things non-DNS related that caught my eye. That obviously that seems to be some momentum moving towards interest in having an age limit for social media in the EU, following on in the footsteps of Australia. Piece of that in Politico. A bunch of other stuff I won't go through. There's Etsy created a new committee on quantum technology. I think that's interesting to see. And coincidentally, the ITF has just published a new RFC on post-quantum terminology. I think the authors, or at least some of them, were from the UK's National Cybersecurity Centre. And then the two much more interesting things that caught my eye was there's a Lego Game Boy, and our modders actually modded it so you can play actual Game Boy cartridges on the Lego Game Boy, and why not? I think that's really fantastic. And then the word of the week, coincidentally from AdGuard, from their blog, was the adpocalypse, talking about why your fridge isn't safe anymore. I think that's just a great word, which really caught my eye. So a whole load of interesting things if you have time. I think I covered that more than once. Ignore that. That's maybe a duplicate page. Reminder, if you want to do a lightning talk at RIPE, deadline's today, so you need to get that in quickly if you've not already done so. Tomorrow for lightning talks for OARC 45, 5 p.m. tomorrow, if I recall. So the program committee can review them and announce who's going to be presenting on Wednesday. So sort of 5 p.m. Tuesday local time in Stockholm. And then the ITF, as I mentioned, final agenda is being published on this Friday, just for your awareness. And there's a load of other deadlines coming up, not least of which probably the most momentous ones. You've got the Apricot Fellowship applications on the 12th, so that's Sunday, and Monday, I guess that is, the ITF leadership nominations, the extended deadline. So if you've not nominated people, including yourself, please do so. They were short of a few nominees, hence they extended it by 2 weeks. I've highlighted all the things going on this week just to make a point. There's lots of stuff, all in rather the sort of day glow yellow on your screen. But plenty of stuff through this month and next month. Is very much sort of conference season at the moment, as you can see. Plenty of interest. And then finally, next week, we'll talk a little bit about the RIPE agenda, as well as anything of interest that comes out of the IAB W3C workshop on age-based content access restrictions, and also anything of interest from OARC 45, if anyone that's there wishes to share anything. So we'll a bit of a mix next week. And then following week is RIPE. So we won't do a call that week because I'll probably be in sessions, but if you're in Bucharest, we can talk in person instead. Scary concept. Beer could be involved if you're around. So that's it from me. We've got 2 minutes left. So let's just pause and see. Anyone got any comments? And Peter's rightly reminded me in the chat you've got Dublin coming up, this sort of ICANN AGM in Dublin the week after RIPE as well. That should be really good fun. I'll be on holiday in New York, so I definitely won't be going. And the time change kicks in later this month, and I did put on the reminder I send out, I will remind you when it changes, because I think it doesn't make any difference for those of us in Europe, but I know for anyone from North America, we get out of sync for maybe a couple of weeks. So do bear that in mind. From the 20-something, I think, of October from memory, but I'll put a reminder in the with a link to the recording as well. Okay, that's everything from me. Anyone else got anything else you want to share?
Thank you very much. It's very nice. Appreciate it.
Okay, you're very welcome, Ryan. Okay, just a reminder that Andrew Losty of UCL is presenting on IoT in RIPE as well, which would be really good. And I know there's a discussion on DELEG. There's a DELEG BOF as well, I think, on the Thursday, same day as the DNS working group. Brilliant. All right, well, we're out of time. Have a fantastic week and look forward to catching up same time next week. See you all then. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, Andrew. Thanks all.